There are many practices that artists go through to start their paintings and literally figure out what their interest is, what they want to spend their time painting, and what their viewers might enjoy. So the first thing I do typically, my routine, if I can share it, is to get out of my car with nothing but a viewer. This is my homemade 2 pieces of cardboard. Or you can do something like the old value viewer. And I take a stroll around, take a look, try to quiet my mind, try to do some slow looking. What I'm typically looking for is a spark of interest, something that excites me. And then I'll use this viewer to start looking at value shapes to break up my canvas, because that ultimately is extremely important for this process. So I've ended up, after about 10-15 minutes of looking around, at this location, which is pretty amazing, and I have been playing with my viewer. I've done horizontal, square, vertical, rectangle, just some slow looking, squinting, and literally trying to imagine a painting looking through my viewer. I'm thinking about where I'm going to put my horizon line, if it's high, if it's low. And basically, no details, just value shapes. And in essence, I'm looking for poetry. I don't want to make a police report. I've pretty much determined that my subject is going to be the river flowing. And in particular, my focal point is going to be at the juncture of the grasses and where the edge of the river meets. It's a dramatic spot filled with color and light against the dark shadows of the hillside behind it. So it's a spot that really draws your eye, and I want to lead up to that. So at this point, I'm going to start literally playing with my composition, using shapes, and then put them into value. One of the first things I do when I begin is to determine where the horizon line is. So how do you figure out where the horizon line is? Just really simply put your pencil right in front of your eyes, and it will go right to the horizon line. Everything below the horizon line goes up to that, and everything above tends to descend. The second thing I'll do is pay attention to the way the sun is going to move, and I'll try and get my value shadows in quickly, because they're going to change. But knowing which way the sun is going to move is often very helpful for that. So I've determined that the best composition for this is a long, thin, I'll probably start with a 10 by 20 inch canvas, and let's get going. I'm using a simple wire, thick wire, found at a hardware store as a drawing pencil, but in this case, it's a drawing stick, but it's often used as a plumb line. In this case, I'm using it to determine a perspective line. So this is my 2-dimensional piece. So I start with simple shapes. I want them to have variety. I'm not spending a lot of time. It's playtime, really. And it doesn't need to be large at all, and it doesn't need to have a single detail. Just keep to the shapes. It's the basic a composition, graphic design process going on right now. The sky is going to almost always, my lightest. Horizontal planes will be a secondary value, and vertical planes and shadow of vertical especially will be my darkest value line. I'm going to try a second variation and see if I like it better. It is a time to play, and it only takes a couple minutes, and it's so valuable to do. It's always terrific to take your time, have fun, make a bunch of these thumbnail studies, especially if you're not in a rush or have a day where you can make these preliminary plans. It's time well spent. So this is a gray tone paper, and I'm working with just a black and a white, using the mid-tone of the paper as my mid-tone value. And now I'll just step back, think about it, think about my subject, my intention. I'll even try to name the painting right from the get-go. That will help me keep my focus on what it is I really want to say. So I've made my decision. I'm going to go with my first little study, and I'm going to start thinking about my color study next. So I'm setting up for my color study, which will also be fairly small and quick. I mean, these are really fun to do, and to do several of them if you can do it. It's a great learning process, and it will end up giving you the best outcome for paintings. This is the spot where you play. This is the spot where you correct your mistakes, rather than all the time it would take to do in a larger one. So before I come out, I lay out my paints, and I've got a real simplified palette here. Just a basic titanium zinc white mix. That's sliding down the palette. Cadmium yellow light, cadmium red light, alizarin, permanent alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, and a little burnt sienna, which I want to use for my underpainting. The other paint blobs that you see here are mixed from the primaries. So this orange is mixed from this cad yellow light and this cad red. This is a purple mixed from the ultramarine and the alizarin. And then I have two pieces of green, because I knew we were going to see a lot of green, that I simply mixed from ultramarine blue and yellow, but in different quantities, so you see light and dark. Finally, I always find it helpful to mix a black. The black is not a tube black, but rather ultramarine blue and a little burnt sienna mixed, and that will give me black. You typically get a lot of grays when you're trying to show distance, a gray-blue. So just to show you, this is the gray that's quite practical that comes from the black that I've mixed these two colors with. So I like to have a little gray ready on the palette to add into things for the distance. Everything in the distance will be less contrast, less value, less color saturation. Things in the foreground are more exaggerated along those lines. More color, more contrast. So let's get started. So I'm going to go from this little tiny sketch that I've started out, and this is a very simple, but it makes our point of playing with simple shapes. 2/3 above the horizon, 1/3 below. My horizon line is right there, and my focal point is at the apex of the marsh against the dark of the trees. Just like in painting, I'll start with my darks and end up with my lightest lights. I'm going to try and mix the colors as close as I can, but I really want to get them correct, because if I can discover what the correct combination is here, it's a piece of cake. If I do it later in my painting, it's going to take me much longer to be working on my painting. One thing I want to take a moment to look at is my value card. I want to know what range this is really going to be in. This is, yes, my darkest dark, but how dark is it? So I want to compare it to a pure black. There are a couple super cheap, silly things that I use all the time, but boy, they sure help me get to the point quickly. My drawing stick, my viewer, and value card, and a mid-gray toned piece of cardboard that I've taken a hole punch or two so that I can compare colors, values. So if I'm wondering which is darker, the grasses up in front of me or the hillside way in the back, your eyes will deceive you, and it is hard to see. We're looking at the far distant hillside, and yes, it's green, but what does it look like compared to the bright green up in front? And when you do a comparison, putting a hole on each, it really answers the question pretty quickly. So as far as the value range goes, I'm holding up a simple value card, and there's no pure black here. There is no pure white. So my value range is going to be reduced in the middle section, probably from 2 to 8. So I want to keep that in mind as well. And yes, I'm redrawing those simple shapes. Every time you do your drawing, it's going to improve your composition. You keep making little tweaks and it keeps improving. I decided the first piece was a little too dark. And later on, I will actually mix my paints and match them to this color study, having already made my decisions and gone through the process. By the way, you wonder why I'm painting directly on the paper. You can paint on small pieces of canvas, you can paint on paper, you can paint on a number of things. I use this gray tone paper, and I literally drop a piece of cardboard over half of it and hit the top with a quick spray of shellac from the hardware store. It dries in 30 seconds, and it's enough of a separation between the paint and the paper that it will not deteriorate and eat through the paper. So it works pretty easily, and it's a lovely surface to work on. I'm mixing a little of that gray in with the green and popping that into the far hillside. As these trees go up, they're just catching some of the light, but they're still basically a dark mass, and that's the way I want to think about them. The water is a reflection of the greens plus the blue. It's a beautiful, almost army green out there. So I'm going to add a little of my pre-mixed orange into that. I'm checking my value card against the value of the water. I want to make sure if it's the mid-tone. And it is a little darker in the mid-tone. My palette, by the way, is a mid-tone gray. So I know that this is a little bit too dark. I want it just to be a little darker than the value on this palette. And you can see I've got sort of a train of changing values even on the water and color, because as the water goes into the trees, it definitely gets darker, but not as dark as the trees behind it. This is a crucial juncture. It's my focal point, and I need it to be considerably brighter and lighter than the water and the trees behind. So let me lighten that up quite a bit. Using the lighter green that I mixed and adding a little orange to it. And again, as that green gets close to me, it's going to be a little more saturated. The water is a darker value than the sky, but it's reflecting a good amount of the same blue. It's really a mixture of the brown mud bottom plus the blue sky reflected on it, and a little bit of green in it in spots reflected from the trees. I don't need to detail that too much at this point. This is a basic shape. I'm still trying to just keep this in simple, basic color value shapes. It only takes one dot for me to look at something and see if it's wrong, and then you'll see me change it right away. If something doesn't look right on your painting, don't keep painting it. Everything is related to it. Immediately stop and change it. I'm going to go for a clean brush for the sky. I'm not showing a lot of it, and it's a pretty beautiful blue today. I think I can stick to a simple making sure it's considerably lighter than my midtone on my palette. Okay, now I'm going to start making some adjustments. And it's easy, a piece of cake at this stage. It is the place where I solve all my problems for the most part. There's lots more later that will come up. I'm going to add some light blue into that background, let that recede a little bit more. And a little bit of green into the hilltop. Stepping back for a little more close consideration. And I think we've just about settled. I can always make a few more color studies. As the day goes on, those relationships are going to change. The trees on the right will become bright green and things on the left will wash out in the sun. So there's some different times of the day where your painting will work out better than others. Okay, now I'm going to set up and get ready to do my underpainting. So I have a lightly toned canvas. I gave a wash of a red oxide, transparent red oxide with a bunch of solvent, and then wiped it down with a cloth. I try to use a cloth because the paper towels will leave little paper schnibbles that you don't want to deal with. The second thing I did is put in this big X. That is to help me determine my composition, keep me away from the center where I don't want to locate my focal point. And it's exactly the same as using the rule of thirds. Here would be my center and the X line. So those junctures are much the same as this. I don't want my focal point to be leaving the canvas, and I don't want it to be dead center either. So a good point is a center spot somewhere between the edge and the center in any one of these spots. So I've placed my sketch on the ground nearby because I need to refer to that all the time. Once you make your plan, stick to it. The sun is going to change. But if you keep making changes with the changing day, you're always going to get in trouble and you'll lose your original good composition. So keep that handy and keep referring to it. In fact, I refer to this even more than I do what I'm looking at often. So I know this is where I want those grasses to meet the water's edge. I know this is my horizon line. That's what this line is that I put in immediately. I know I wanted a higher point there. I also find that these lines relate to the shape of my canvas. So if I can repeat or mimic those lines in any of these spots, it helps to unite the whole canvas together. I want this distant hillside to be a little smaller than this. I don't want to repeat any shape if I can help it. And from here, it's a simple blocking in of value And then I can not have to worry about my value anymore. When I start mixing colors as I go on to a painting later on, I'll just repeat the values that I've already established on my canvas. Decisions already made. This is big and loose. I'm using a number 12, sort of a scrubbing brush is what I call it. The reason I'm using this reddish tone is because this is totally blue and green, and I want a little color vibration coming through, and having this dark, warm undertone will provide that. There are other times when I might tone it with a different color. This is a color that will dry very fast. And while it is drying, it will give me time to mix up my colors, and then they will not pick up the underneath. This will completely dry. So as I finish this up, I'll either complete it today and keep on painting if it works out and the weather hasn't changed too much, or the time of day, or I'll come back tomorrow or the next day where the weather is very similar. There's always going to be adjustments. Don't hesitate. As soon as you see something that's not quite right, not feeling good, get in and change it right away. Oop. So I've gone back in, made a couple more changes, and there may be more. I always want to keep improving as much as I can. So after this, I'm going to let this dry and start mixing up my colors and go on to the color portion of this. Happy painting, everyone. See you in the next video.